Welcome to USA Drama Queen. What happens when love, legacy, and millions of dollars collide behind the closed gates of a world-famous farm? Tonight, we take you inside a story so shocking, so layered, it feels like fiction but unfolds like brutal reality. For years, fans of Little People, Big World believed Roloff Farms was more than land, it was a legacy. A symbol of resilience, family, and generations built by Matt Roloff with blood, sweat, and vision. But behind the pumpkin patches and smiling cameras, something far darker was brewing. A secret transfer of ownership. A sudden multi-million-dollar sale to a foreign businessman. A fiancé who vanished overnight. A courtroom that would decide not just money, but betrayal. And when the dust settled, even Matt's past came knocking, as Amy Roloff and her husband, Chris Merrick, stepped forward with a claim that threatened to tear the family apart once and for all. This isn't just a story about dirt and deeds. This is a story about trust, power, heartbreak, and the devastating price of believing the wrong person. Stay with USA Drama Queen, because what you're about to hear changes everything you thought you knew about the family behind the farm. Long before courtrooms, contracts, and allegations of betrayal, Roloff Farms was born from pure, stubborn determination. When Matt Roloff first purchased that sprawling Oregon property decades ago, few believed it could become what it ultimately did. The land was rough, unpolished, and a monumental financial risk. But Matt saw a future where others saw only fields. With relentless work, he transformed it. First into a functioning farm, then a thriving agritourism destination, and finally, the iconic heart of a global television phenomenon. Through Little People, Big World, audiences didn't just watch a show, they watched a homestead grow. They saw children take their first steps on that soil. They witnessed weddings celebrated under its trees and family milestones marked season after season. To Matt, the farm was never just property or a business asset. It was the living, breathing proof of his life's work, a testament to overcoming physical and financial odds to build something that would outlast him. His divorce from Amy Roloff was a public and private earthquake, shaking the very foundation of this carefully constructed world. Yet, in the aftermath, a fragile peace was brokered. Matt retained control of the majority of the farm's operational land and business. Public statements emphasized mutual respect and a shared desire for stability, for the sake of their children and the legacy they'd both contributed to. For years, that balance, however tense, held. The farm continued to operate, the pumpkins were still carved, and the cameras, for the most part, kept rolling. It seemed the storm had passed. But the calm was an illusion. A new storm was forming on the horizon, one that would arrive not with a clash of thunder, but with the quiet, deliberate click of a pen signing a document. Her name was Karen Chandler. She entered Matt's orbit not through romance, but through business. Originally a key employee, Karen managed logistics, finances, and the day-to-day whirlwind that Roloff Farms had become. She was efficient, poised, and indispensable. In the emotionally raw period following his divorce, Matt found in Karen not just a competent manager, but a confidant. She listened. She offered support. She presented herself as a steadying force in a chaotic chapter. Gradually, the professional relationship deepened into a personal one. Friends and associates later noted that Karen's role evolved from employee to partner to, in Matt's eyes, a life partner. When their engagement was announced, it felt, to the public, like a natural next step, a happy ending for Matt after years of personal upheaval. But with that engagement came a monumental shift in dynamics and access. Karen was now intimately involved in every facet of Matt's life and, crucially, his business. She understood the farm's complex financial architecture, its legal standing, its debts, and its most valuable, subdividable parcels of land. This was information known only to a tiny, trusted inner circle. And Matt, believing he had found unwavering loyalty and love, granted her unparalleled access and trust. It was during this period that a pivotal decision was made, one that would later be dissected in legal filings and media reports. Matt Roloff transferred a significant ownership interest in Roloff Farms to Karen Chandler. The exact nature and percentage of this transfer would become a core issue, but the intent, as framed at the time, was one of security and commitment. It was portrayed as a gesture of faith, a blending of assets for a shared future. A promise that they were in this together, building that future on the land Matt loved. To Matt, it was a symbol. To others, in hindsight, it looked like a strategic maneuver. Because unknown to Matt, or so he would later claim, parallel conversations were occurring. Plans were being formulated that had little to do with shared dreams and everything to do with cold, hard valuation. A potential buyer, a businessman with interests far from Oregon's pastoral scenes, was being cultivated. The very land Matt had poured his soul into, the land he believed was now safely held within the bounds of his new partnership, was being appraised not for its sentimental value, but for its multi-million-dollar price tag. The stage was being set not for a wedding, but for a sale. And the person setting that stage was the one person Matt had trusted with his legacy. The betrayal, when it began to unfold, did not arrive with a dramatic confrontation. It began with subtle signs, then legal notices, and finally, a stark, painful reality. The future of Roloff Farms was suddenly, terrifyingly, out of Matt Roloff's hands. The control he had fought for his entire life was slipping away, and the mechanism of its loss was the very partnership he had embraced. Before we delve deeper into the shocking details of the secret sale and the legal war that followed, I need to ask you a question. Are you invested in this story? Do you believe in supporting the underdog, the person who built something from nothing only to see it threatened? If you're on Matt Roloff's side in this heartbreaking saga, if you believe legacy should be protected, then show your support right now. We have a massive goal: 5,000 likes on this video. Every single like sends a message. It tells the algorithm that stories about integrity, hard work, and fighting for what's yours matter. It helps us bring you more deep dive investigations like this one. So, tap that like button right now, smash it, and let's get to 5,000. Your support is what fuels this channel. And while you're at it, if you haven't already, subscribe to USA Drama Queen and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single twist in this ongoing drama. We have so much more to reveal. Now, back to the story. The paperwork that would change everything was signed not with fanfare, but in the quiet, professional atmosphere of a lawyer's office. No film crew was present. No family meeting was called. To the outside world, and to the millions of fans, Roloff Farms remained Matt Roloff's kingdom. But in the shadows of legal jargon and notarized signatures, a fundamental shift of power was executed. Then, the news broke, sending shockwaves through the fan community and the family itself. Roloff Farms, or a significant portion of its most valuable land, had been sold. And not to a family member, not to a longtime friend or a local preservationist. It was sold to a business entity, a foreign investor with no emotional ties to the land's history. The price tag was reported to be in the multi-millions. For Matt, the financial gain was potentially significant, but the cost was immeasurable. This was the land he had promised his children. The land where his grandchildren played. It was the central character of his life story. But here's where the plot thickened exponentially. Allegations began to surface, first in hushed tones among insiders, then in legal documents. The claim was that Matt was not the sole, or perhaps even the primary, architect of this sale. The narrative that emerged suggested Karen Chandler, now holding a legal stake in the property, was a driving force behind the transaction. Whispers turned into reports that she had been communicating directly with the buyer's representatives, negotiating terms, and facilitating the deal, activities that, if true, placed her in a profound conflict of interest. The devoted fiancé was now being painted, in the court of public opinion and potentially in a court of law, as a shrewd operator who had leveraged emotional trust for financial gain. Matt's world shattered. The personal betrayal was bad enough. But the professional and legacy betrayal was catastrophic. He faced a nightmare scenario, watching his life's work potentially converted into a development property or an asset on a distant investor spreadsheet, all facilitated by the woman he planned to marry. The engagement, unsurprisingly, collapsed under the weight of accusations and broken trust. What was left was not a grieving couple, but two parties locked in a cold, complex legal and financial standoff. The shared future had evaporated, leaving only the difficult division of shared assets that included the heart of Roloff Farms. Yet, just as this battle lines were being drawn, a second front opened, adding a layer of familial strife that no one saw coming. Amy Roloff, Matt's ex-wife, and her husband Chris Merrick entered the fray. While Amy had previously sold her portion of the property to Matt after their divorce, new claims surfaced. In the wake of the scandalous sale and the internal family chaos, Amy and Chris reportedly asserted that certain verbal agreements, understandings, or promises regarding the future of the farm and its use had been broken. Their claim, while separate from the Matt versus Karen legal issues, added immense pressure and emotional complication. It was no longer just a story of a romantic partner's alleged betrayal. It was a full-blown family crisis, threatening to permanently splinter the Roloff name. The farm, once a symbol of unity, was now the epicenter of a multi-sided war. The emotional toll on Matt was visible and profound. In rare public comments and through the filtered lens of the television show, a different man seemed to emerge, one grappling with grief, anger, and a deep sense of loss that went far beyond real estate. Friends described him as heartbroken and disillusioned. The very qualities that had built the farm, his vision, his trust in his own judgment, his willingness to take big risks, were the same qualities that had seemingly led to its vulnerability. He was forced to confront not just the actions of another, but his own decisions. Had his desire for companionship and partnership after his divorce blinded him to warning signs? Had his love for the farm and his desire to share it ultimately placed it in jeopardy? This period was marked by a painful silence from one key figure, Karen Chandler. As public speculation reached a fever pitch, she maintained a low profile, offering no detailed public defense or explanation. Her social media, once filled with farm life and coupledom, went quiet or shifted focus. This silence was deafening. It allowed the narrative of the betrayed benefactor to solidify in the public mind. For fans of the show, it created a vacuum filled with theories, outrage, and a desperate hunger for answers. The idyllic television narrative had ruptured, revealing a much messier, more painful reality underneath. The legal proceedings, as they inched forward, promised answers but delivered mostly complexity. Depositions were taken. Financial records were subpoenaed. The transfer of ownership documents became central exhibits. The core question the courts would have to untangle was one of intent and agency. Who truly orchestrated the sale? Was it a mutual business decision between two partners, as one side might argue? Or was it a calculated maneuver by one partner to liquidate a shared asset for personal profit, potentially breaching fiduciary duties and agreements built on personal trust? The legalese masked the raw human drama, but every motion filed, every hearing scheduled, was a step toward deciding who was right, who was wrong, and who would ultimately control the narrative and the money. And through it all, the farm itself stood as a silent witness. The pumpkin season came and went. Tourists still visited, though perhaps with a more curious, searching eye. The iconic red barns and winding paths were still there, but they now existed under a cloud of uncertainty. Would the new owner respect its history? Would the family ever truly be welcome there again? The land, which had survived weather, market crashes, and family disputes, now faced its most existential threat, a fundamental disconnect from the story that gave it meaning. It was no longer just Roloff Farms. It was a disputed asset, a crime scene of the heart, and a symbol of how quickly legacy can turn into litigation. We will analyze the specific legal claims being made. We will look at the role of the mysterious foreign buyer. We will examine the precise nature of the ownership transfer to Karen and the potentially devastating financial implications for Matt Roloff. We will also explore the reaction of the Roloff children, Zach, Jeremy, Molly, and Jacob, as they watched their inheritance and their family's home become the subject of a bitter public and private battle. Did they side with their father? Did they feel betrayed by him? Where do their loyalties lie in this unimaginable conflict? The fallout is still spreading. The court case could set precedents. The family wounds may take generations to heal. And the ultimate fate of the most famous farm in reality TV history still hangs in the balance. This is a saga of modern Americana, where love, money, and television collide with devastating consequences. The journey to the truth is only just beginning. We saw how Matt Roloff's trust in his fiancée, Karen Chandler, intertwined with the legacy of Roloff Farms, culminating in a secretive multi-million-dollar sale that left Matt's world and his family's future in ruins. But that was only the opening act. The real battle, a complex war waged in legal briefings and in the court of public opinion, was just beginning. Tonight, we go deeper into the trenches. We're examining the cold, hard legal claims, the shocking financial details, and the fracturing of a television family in real time. This is the story of what happens when private promises meet public court filings, and a man is forced to fight not just for his land, but for his very name. With the initial shock of the farm sale settling into a grim reality, the battlefield shifted from the emotional to the forensic. Legal teams were assembled, their first task being to construct competing narratives from the same set of facts. On one side, Matt Roloff's position, as inferred from actions and sparse public comments, was one of victimhood, a man blindsided by a partner's self-interest. On the other, while Karen Chandler remained publicly silent, her legal stance would inevitably need to frame the sale as a legitimate business transaction, perhaps even a necessary or mutually beneficial one. The court documents, once filed, became a treasure trove of revelation and allegation. While specific dollar figures are often redacted or sealed, the scale hinted at was staggering. We're talking about a property valued in the tens of millions, with the sold portion representing a life-changing sum. But the central legal question wasn't just about the sale price, it was about authority and consent. Key to this was the dissection of that critical ownership transfer to Karen. Was it a gift, an advancement on a marital share, or a transfer in consideration for services or future partnership? The characterization of this transfer would determine her legal standing and rights to execute a sale. Allegations likely began to surface in these filings. Claims that could include breach of fiduciary duty, a legal term for violating the trust of a business partner. There might be claims of undue influence, suggesting Matt was emotionally vulnerable and manipulated into the initial transfer. There could be arguments about the specific terms of their personal partnership agreement, if one existed beyond the engagement. Each side's lawyers would be poring over every email, every text message, every financial record from the period leading up to the sale, searching for the smoking gun that proved either calculated deceit or fully informed consent. And then there was the enigmatic figure of the buyer, a foreign businessman, an investor with no sentimental attachment to the Roloff story. His role was pivotal but passive in the personal drama. For him, this was a simple asset acquisition, likely viewed as a valuable piece of American real estate with brand recognition. But his involvement raised immediate practical and emotional concerns for the family and fans. What were his intentions? Would he develop the land, subdivide it, or operate it as a going concern? The uncertainty over the farm's future use added a layer of existential dread to Matt's personal loss. It wasn't just that he no longer owned it, it was that everything he built could be physically erased, the memories literally bulldozed. Amidst this legal maelstrom, the human cost became increasingly visible, most poignantly through the Roloff children. Zach, Jeremy, Molly, and Jacob were not just bystanders, their own histories and futures were tied to that soil. For years, a central, unresolved tension on Little People, Big World had been the farm succession plan. Which child would take over? Would any of them? Matt had often spoken of his desire to keep the farm in the family, but the financial realities were daunting. The children had their own lives, careers, and geographic distances from the farm. This sale, however, especially under these controversial circumstances, effectively slammed the door on that generational dream. It was a decision made for them, not with them. Reactions among the siblings varied. painting a picture of a family unit under extreme stress. Zach Roloff and his wife, Tori, had been the most openly invested in the idea of someday running the farm. They lived nearby and had expressed a deep desire to raise their children there. For Zach, the sale wasn't just a news item, it was the collapse of a personal aspiration. In social media posts and podcast appearances, his disappointment was palpable, tinged with a clear frustration directed at the overall situation. He spoke of the difficulty of explaining the loss to his own children, framing it not just as the loss of a property, but of their heritage. Jeremy Roloff, having moved away to pursue his own ventures and a more private life, had a more detached but still pointed perspective. He often spoke in philosophical terms about legacy, choice, and the burdens of family business. The sale likely confirmed his decision to step away from the farm's orbit, but it also represented a finality, a severing of a tangible connection to his childhood. His commentary often seemed aimed at the broader lessons about boundaries and business, perhaps indirectly critiquing the enmeshment of family and assets that had led to the current crisis. Molly Roloff, the most private of the siblings, remained largely silent, her distance from the public drama being a choice in itself. Jacob Roloff, long critical of the reality TV machine and its impact on his family, likely saw the sale as the toxic, logical endpoint of a system that commodified personal life. For him, the farm was already lost to the pressures of fame and commerce. This legal battle was just the final, ugly paperwork. The divergence in the children's reactions created new fault lines. While they may have universally been disappointed or hurt, their differing public stances and private alliances put strain on sibling relationships. Who did they believe? Where did their sympathies lie between their father and the woman he had almost married? The unified front the family had tried to maintain for the cameras was now impossible. The farm sale had succeeded in doing what years of typical family strife had not. It created a schism where silence and carefully worded statements replaced open dialogue. Meanwhile, the secondary front in this war, the claims from Amy Roloff and Chris Merrick, added a fascinating layer of complexity. While their legal interest in the core property was limited after Amy's previous sale to Matt, their new assertions suggested that the fallout from the Karen Chandler situation had broader repercussions. Perhaps they claimed that agreements about shared use of certain areas for family events, or understandings about the farm's operational future, were violated by the new ownership situation. Their move could be seen as protective, ensuring their own rights and those of their grandchildren in the new reality. But it could also be interpreted as a strategic positioning, a way to secure financial compensation or formalize rights in the wake of the chaos. For Matt, this must have felt like being attacked from all sides, by his former fiancée, by a distant buyer, and now, in a new way, by his ex-wife. The farm was pulling everyone into its vortex of conflict. This story is unfolding in real time, and your engagement is what allows us to conduct this level of investigation. The truth in situations like this is often buried in documents and details. If you're invested in uncovering that truth, if you believe in holding people accountable and protecting family legacies, we need you right now. We are still pushing for 5,000 likes on this video. Every single like boosts the story, helps it reach more people, and sends a clear signal that you demand in-depth reporting. We're here to be your voice, to ask the hard questions. So please, take a second, show your support with a like, and if you haven't, subscribe to USA Drama Queen and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the final chapter we're building, where we reveal even more startling information about the financial maneuvers and the potential future of the Roloff family. Now, back to the investigation. As the legal discovery process churned on, a more nuanced picture of the relationship between Matt and Karen began to emerge from those close to the situation. Associates described a partnership that, in its later stages, was less about romance and more about business management. Karen's role had become supremely powerful. She wasn't just offering opinions, she was executing decisions. She had logins to accounts, relationships with vendors and lawyers, and a deep understanding of cash flow. This level of control, granted willingly by Matt, now looked in hindsight like a relinquishing of the reins. There were reports, never fully confirmed but persistently circulating about the specific timing of events. That the initial contact with the buyer's representatives may have predated the full transparency to Matt. That discussions about parcel valuations and subdivision potential were had in meetings Matt did not attend. Again, these are allegations, but they form the core of the betrayal narrative, that while Matt was planning a future with Karen, she was clinically evaluating the farm's most lucrative exit strategy. The emotional and physical toll on Matt Roloff was becoming a story in itself. Friends described a man who seemed aged by the stress, wrestling with a profound sense of foolishness. This was a man whose entire public persona was built on being a savvy, determined builder. To have that self-image shattered by a personal relationship was a uniquely humiliating pain. He was seen less around the farm, the place that had always been his sanctuary. The joy he once took in projects and plans seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a weary preoccupation with legal strategy and damage control. For Karen Chandler, the court of public opinion had largely reached a verdict long before any legal one. In online forums, social media comments, and fan discussions, she was predominantly cast as the villain, the gold digger, the schemer who infiltrated a family and targeted its crown jewel. This narrative, whether entirely fair or not, became its own inescapable force. It raised the stakes for her legally. A loss in court would cement this reputation permanently. But it also made any potential settlement or quiet resolution more difficult. The story had taken on a life of its own. The television show, Little People, Big World, now faced an unprecedented creative and ethical dilemma. How do you film a reality show when the core reality is a devastating, ongoing legal conflict that family members likely cannot discuss on camera? The season that covered this period was inevitably shrouded in a strange, elliptical tension. Conversations were hinted at but not shown. Conflicts were alluded to with vague language. The farm itself, once the sunny backdrop for every episode, now loomed as an absent character, a ghost haunting every scene. The show's format, built on resolving family tiffs by the episode's end, was completely unequipped to handle a rupture of this magnitude. The dissonance between the televised version of the Roloffs and the real-world tragedy was wider than ever. And what of the farm's operations during all this? The business, a source of income for many, had to continue. Pumpkin season tours, weddings, and other events were likely locked into contracts. The new owner, as a business entity, would have an interest in maintaining revenue streams, at least in the short term. This created a surreal reality. Tourists were happily taking photos in front of the big red barn, buying souvenirs, and enjoying a day out, completely unaware of, or indifferent to, the bitter ownership war and heartbreak that now defined the property. The farm was functioning, but its soul was in litigation limbo. As the case moved toward potential mediation or trial, the possible outcomes ranged from a complete victory for one side to a messy, dissatisfying split down the middle. Matt could potentially win a judgment that invalidates the sale or awards him significant damages, but can a court ruling ever restore trust or undo personal betrayal? Karen could be vindicated, her actions ruled as perfectly legal and within her rights, but would that verdict repair her public image or her relationships within the Roloff orbit? And in the middle, the children are left to pick up the pieces of their own inheritance, both emotional and financial. The foreign buyer holds the deed, waiting for the noise to die down to decide the asset's fate. The deeper theme that this saga exposes is the peril of mixing profound emotional need with high-stakes business. Matt Roloff, in a vulnerable chapter of his life, sought partnership. He found someone who was competent, supportive, and willing to step into the complex world he had built. In his gratitude and affection, he granted access and ownership, believing it would cement a shared future. But he may have failed to install the safeguards he would have used in a purely business partnership. The heart overrode the head. The result is a masterclass in how not to handle a legacy asset. This is also a story about the illusion of control. Matt Roloff spent a lifetime controlling his narrative, his environment, and his business against significant odds. He built a literal and figurative empire by force of will. Yet, This episode revealed the fundamental vulnerability that exists when control is willingly shared. It showed that the greatest threat to a legacy isn't always external competition or market forces. Sometimes, it's the person you invite to sit at your kitchen table and review the books. We have now reached the eye of the storm. The legal battle is joined. The family is fractured. The future of the farm is a question mark. But the story does not end here. In our third and final installment, we will project forward. We will explore the potential long-term consequences for everyone involved. What will this mean for Matt Roloff's personal brand and his future endeavors? Can the Roloff family ever find a new equilibrium after such a foundational loss? What are the real financial numbers behind the scenes, and what might a settlement look like? And most hauntingly, what is the ultimate fate of Roloff Farms? Will it remain a tourist destination, become a housing development, or simply fade away as a relic of a bygone era of reality TV? The final chapter of this saga is still being written, but the contours of its ending are starting to take shape. It's a story of reckoning, resilience, and the painful price of a dream. The drama is far from over. Welcome to the final chapter here on USA Drama Queen. We have navigated the roots of a dream, witnessed the shock of betrayal, and analyzed the brutal legal war that followed. Now, we arrive at the reckoning. This is the story of consequences, permanent, life-altering outcomes that reshape families, redefine legacies, and leave an indelible mark on everyone they touch. The dust from the courtroom and the court of public opinion is beginning to settle. What remains? Who is left standing? And what is the ultimate fate of the most famous farm in reality television history? Tonight, we piece together the aftermath, examine the scars, and ask the hardest question of all: was any of it worth it? The legal conflict between Matt Roloff and Karen Chandler did not reach a dramatic, Perry Mason-style courtroom verdict. In cases this personal, fraught with emotional landmines and costly legal fees, the more common outcome is a settlement, a private, often confidential agreement that ends the public fighting, but leaves the true resolution shrouded in secrecy. While the exact terms between Matt and Karen have not been broadcast to the world, the outcome can be inferred from the aftermath. The engagement was irrevocably over. The shared financial interests were severed. Karen Chandler receded from the public narrative of Roloff Farms, her name now permanently attached to its most controversial chapter rather than its future. For Matt, any settlement likely represented a bitter compromise. He may have recovered some financial compensation, a portion of the proceeds from the sale he felt was unjust. He may have secured certain rights or acknowledgments. But no amount of money could refund the lost years, restore the shattered trust, or reverse the transfer of the land itself. The victory, if one could call it that, was purely defensive, stopping the bleeding rather than healing the wound. The farm, or the crucial piece of it, was still gone. The dream of passing it on, intact, to his children was now a phantom. He had to confront the painful lesson that sometimes, the best outcome you can fight for is simply to survive the battle. The true cost was measured not in legal filings, but in the quiet moments afterward. Associates described a Matt Roloff who was fundamentally changed. The irrepressible visionary, the perpetual optimist who could see a pumpkin patch in a muddy field, seemed tempered by a new, weary pragmatism. The spark of relentless creation had been dampened by the experience of deconstruction, not of buildings, but of his own judgment. He turned his focus inward, to his remaining personal property and to smaller, more controlled projects. The grand, sweeping scale of his ambitions for the farm appeared to have contracted. It was as if he had learned, in the hardest way possible, that building something monumental also makes you a monumental target. The ripple effects through the Roloff family structure were